Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining this session on the urgency of green entrepreneurship to save the planet. This is, I believe, the most important session today and the closest one to my heart. I used to be in clean tech and green tech, moved out a bit, but really wanting to bring Startup Genome back to being an actor to help. So wanted to start, assuming that we have started, with an introduction of each of you and the amazing organizations that you have built or you're part of the leadership of. Maybe Pratap, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Jeff. So I run Climate Collective. We support climate entrepreneurs throughout India and now also in Sri Lanka, Maldives. And we've been active in other parts of South Asia, as well as in Africa and Southeast Asia. So these are the kinds of pre-revenue programs like ClimateLaunchpad that Frans started six years back, as well as other programs like Climate Ready for Women to increase the number of women clean tech founders that come into the program. We see, especially in certain areas of waste like upcycling, et cetera, the importance of involving everyone, including especially women in particular in waste, really increases the ability for us to solve these problems. We also do some research to support the ecosystem. India is quite different from Europe. We're a few years behind or the rest of the world, but it's catching up. There's a lot of interest in entrepreneurs to solve climate problems here.
Thank you. Charlotte, can you tell us about your organization?
Sure, and it's not one I founded. It was founded about 15 years ago by Michael Bloomberg and the former mayor of New York. It's a network for mayors and their city officials spanning 96 cities around the world, which encompasses 700 million citizens or a quarter of the world's GDP. We have very pragmatic knowledge sharing and peer support for the mayors and their teams around climate action, reducing air pollution, improving public transport and quality of life for the citizens. In particular, I've been working on building up a network of experts that are the economic advisors to the mayors, those that are fostering their entrepreneurs, their SMEs, and their clean tech clusters in their cities. So I believe that's why I've been invited here today.
Thank you. Great to have you with us. And Frans, please tell us, and you're touching, and you've founded more than one organization, the network. So please tell us about those.
Yeah. So the past 8 years, I've set up 2 organizations for startups. One in Europe called Climate Kick Accelerator. That's a program for sort of early stage entrepreneurs. I think they got up to about 100,000 euros in funding, lots of coaching, and well, we've had now 1,500 teams through that program, and they've attracted about 1.5 billion on follow-on investment. So that's been quite better than I expected when I started, basically. And then as a side project, we started ClimateLaunchpad, and ClimateLaunchpad is really if you're in the idea stage of a company. So you want to explore if you want to do it. It's sort of like a business school program for green entrepreneurs, sort of budding green entrepreneurs. But then entrepreneurs don't like school, so we made it a competition. And that runs now in over 60 countries. And that has been a big surprise, actually, to see that sort of go to Africa, to go to Asia. It's basically in all continents except Antarctica. So it's been a great adventure.
Yeah, competitions are very popular online courses for entrepreneurs. So I wanted to start with the discussion with talking about before the crisis. We felt there was renewed momentum around green tech, because of Greta and many others. In Montreal, where I'm from, there was 500,000 people who took part in the climate walk. And I want to see, talk about what was Greta's impact, what was the context also more broadly for green tech pre-COVID crisis. Pratap, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Thank you. So, India is a little bit different. We did see some coverage of Greta. We did have some movements very similar in India, but our drivers are very different. Where we have huge pollution problems, we have a huge inefficiencies in our grid, etc. And what I've seen in terms of political pressure is, in fact, I've seen studies where even the word climate change does not work in India, but pollution does. So whenever you talk about mobilizing for this fight, it's on very local issues, and our local issues are related to of course pollution, efficiencies in our electricity system. The lack of access to energy is not a climate change fight; it's a development fight. I think we have 300 million people who don't have access, even today, in any meaningful way. So we had, COVID has been quite bad for us, for like many places, mainly because of the same reasons: the business uncertainty, the depressed consumer demand, at least in the short term. But the interesting thing I've also seen is, in a very short amount of time, we're only month 3 in our lockdown here. For example, clean tech deals closing in the last few weeks, and to me, this is unbelievable. I think that means there's a lot of people who look at the drivers in India that have been impacted by COVID, recognize that is a short-term impact, but the long-term drivers to move to green are related to reducing the problem of pollution and waste that we face, as well as the problem of getting more electricity to more people, to increase the efficiency of our industries as we try to become more competitive, not just in India, but for exporters. So although I'm pretty optimistic that this is only a short-term impact for us. And politically, I think we're seeing the government also supporting this movement to green, even during this crisis.
Thank you. That's great. Frans, what can you tell us about the context pre-crisis and your work with this climate launchpad globally?
So I've been in the
how
space for
COVID maybe changed that.
Yes, I've been in the space for quite a while, and so basically it took 40 years to get solar to an affordable price level, and the same for wind. It took about, let's say, 15-20 years to get electric cars to sort of become competitive on a price level with sort of internal combustion engine cars. So these are really long lines, and then and also people already working in those spaces for decades. And then up comes a young girl from Sweden, and she created a firestorm, I'd say, of public awareness. So that has been tremendous, of course, and not so much for the people who are already in the fight, I'd say, against climate change, but for the people who, like my daughter, who's getting more interested now because there's someone of her age on the stage and creates a platform for a new generation to come in. And also I think she was most effective in communicating that the emperor wasn't wearing clothes. So it's really nice that politicians sign documents that say, well, we're going to do lots of stuff, but if you don't do lots of stuff after that, well, it is kind of painful. And she's been very effective in pointing at that. As for the crisis, mixed bag, I'd say. So one of the things that will happen, one of the fastest ways to create jobs is actually to do renewable energy projects. They're basically infrastructure projects with lots of labor involved. And because you don't need to build a nuclear power plant that takes 20 years, you don't have to do the permitting for a coal-fired power plant. So any energy project that you want to start because you want to create jobs, well, the cheapest way to do it and the fastest way to create jobs is to do renewables. So I actually expect a boost there. And then the other question is, well, what about investment in the technologies that we still need to fix to get to a carbon neutral or circular economy setting in the next sort of 20 years? So how can we all fly around the globe on kerosene or electricity, whatever the technology is, that doesn't put carbon into the atmosphere on that basis? And what I expect to see there is that some countries will move extra fast. So they'll use this crisis to put more government funding and more policy in place that will sort of put them on an even stronger direction to go green, and others will back off. And that's actually going to be really interesting to see how that plays out in the next 10 years, I'd say.
Charlotte, C40 works with a lot of those governments, or at least the city governments. What is the trajectory that you see because of the crisis compared to before?
Well, before the crisis, we were definitely building lots of momentum. Of our 96 cities, over half of them were already on a 5-year trajectory of reducing their carbon emissions. So they had peaked and it was all declining. All of our mayors have committed to a 1.5 degree world and planning for that. And the reduction in emissions shows that it's not just words, it's really happening in practice across the waste, buildings, renewable energy and transport sectors. Many of, I think over 40 have committed to a clean air cities, including many in India and other cities around the world. So Greta is extremely articulate for her generation. It's admirable. And she inspired hundreds of thousands to get out on the streets with their parents, with other of voting age, and mayors have to listen to their electorate. So, she's one of the ways that it's really building momentum. And we'd launched a global Green New Deal last year around how climate action, jobs and justice can all go hand in hand. And we're really seeing the message even stronger, resonating even more. And we've launched a mayor's COVID Economic Recovery Task Force, where there's a lot of focus on what are the levers that mayors can draw on to support their local economies, their local SMEs, their local citizens, not just in the emergency response procedures, but in this longer term recovery to build back better. And they've all committed that they don't want to go back to business as usual. We've reached a decision crossroads, a moment in time which is calling for us to decide, do we put money into high intensity fossil fuel industries to try and spur job creation, or do we take a path that is a brighter future, a lower pollution future, and helps upskill people in all walks of life on a more resilient career path that will have a role for them over the coming decades and contributing to a future that we all want.
Thank you. Yeah, and what I've seen and I was very impressed with in the last 3 months, we work with about 45 governments and agencies, and I've never seen them act so fast. Being able to implement complex policies that, last year would have taken a year, 2 years to go from design to implementation. And they did it in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, implemented billion-dollar policies. So I'm seeing this opportunity of the COVID crisis to create a new modus operandum, and Martina was talking about the reset, and Jonathan was like, it's created the opportunity to change how we do things. And hopefully we keep that change. Love to hear from you. And I'd like to get more specific, because for everybody who's listening to us, the most important is like, what can I get? What is the nugget of knowledge of something that someone else is doing that I can be replicating? So can you tell me one thing, each of you, that started or is happening much faster because of COVID around green tech? And specific projects are being unlocked, or funding that was not there before, or that have been trying to be crystallized for a year, and then suddenly, boom. Frans, I saw you raise your hand.
Yeah, sure. So I wrote a little piece because of Corona, because I had time on my hands, looking back at the past 40 years. I started studying in 1985, so that's 35 years ago. I was a bachelor in environmental technology, so I was really into it. And when I look back at wind at that time, if you would have asked me, will wind ever be competitive? I would have said, no, of course not. It's way too expensive. And 10 years later, I did a project in solar, and I also didn't expect it to get that cheap. And I did a pilot when I was working at the environmental department of the city of Amsterdam in the early 90s with an electric car. And it worked, it drove wonderfully, but the technology was terrible. It was a sodium sulfur battery, and it was crazy expensive. And if you would have asked me, well, 30 years from now, can you buy this car and will it be great? No, of course not. You know, and I was wrong in all cases. So if you've looked at what we achieved in the past 40 years in breakthroughs in clean technologies, is nothing other than completely spectacular, and nobody saw it really coming. So I think the sort of the politicians that are now in the seat to decide, well, what is the direction of my city? What is the direction of my country? Should look at those examples and see how we did it, because there's a lot to learn here. And specifically for this conference, while we're talking the Startup Genome report, these breakthroughs would not have happened without startups. Like the biggest economic opportunity of the 21st century is certainly turning all these industries green that are not green yet. That there's no discussion about that. And if I then look at Denmark and see how they grew the wind turbine industry out of nothing, basically in the 70s, well, I would study Denmark. And by the way, I did, so I published a little article on it. So you don't have to go deep, you can just read the link. But so if I would be a mayor, for instance, of a city, and I see several cities do this, by the way, I would try to be a hub for us building a startup ecosystem around greening specific industries. We have that movement in the Netherlands. Of course, I built it at the scale of Europe, but this is really a big opportunity. Bringing in, sort of putting a nice, beautiful, big problem that you want to fix for society, do it in a way that creates a market so the entrepreneurs can come in and then become one of the tech hubs in the world where that talent can go to be inspired, work with the best people in this industry. I think it's a fantastic opportunity.
Thank you, Frans. So Charlotte, Pratap, any one big project that you see is happening now because of the crisis and the change in constraints, you know, really, and unlocking of the government being able to act faster?
Pratap, do you want to go first?
Yes, sure. Well, I can tell you about an initiative that we're doing, which is kind of similar to how organizations like us, enterprise support organizations, have been moving super fast. I have a partner accelerator in Vietnam, and they had a showcase for 5 startups, I think Ho Chi Minh. And they ran it 6 weeks ago, and 150 investors from the region showed up for this thing. And this literally blew our mind because we were so used to thinking about supporting startups in a much localized way, etc. And we have a problem in India. We are a large country with we do have budgets for startups, but over 1.4 billion, so many people get left out. You know, outside of the Bangalore, Hyderabad, Bombay, Delhi kind of ecosystems. So what we're doing, and it's similar to I see a lot of movement in the industry here in India as well as around, is really thinking about what it means to be virtual. Now, not just virtual because, you know, maybe online Mentor Connects is already to some degree virtual, but even that idea of community. So what is this? You know, it's definitely a life we're going to have for maybe 6 months, maybe 1 year or longer, being in webinars like this, Zoom. But there's such a power here that I think that all of us can figure out to reach out to more and more entrepreneurs out there. So that, I think this is something that we're seeing more of the governments here in India start to support as a way with limited budgets reaching out further than, for example, in their localities.
Any of the recovery money going to green tech? Specifically, can you name 1, 2 projects that have been accelerated, you know, to create jobs and demands? And
Right. There was some movement towards skilling that's coming up. These are not easy things to go to plop money down because, you know, we've already had a big skilling program in India that was in the billions or tens of billions before COVID. But I think what we're going to see is this momentum to really think about skilling, which, as Frans was saying, the potential for green entrepreneurship, especially in certain areas that will be very, very labor intensive. Especially, for example, solar installers, all this stuff, even EVs can have at least in the deployment, have a huge labor or employment impact. So we're seeing the government starting to look at how to now get momentum to pushing towards to jobs, which where we can look at green entrepreneurship. Yeah.
Any one big project that you like that you see being accelerated?
In India, in our space as Startup Accelerator?
Yeah.
We do have a...
You're talking about more for scaling, and so what are you scaling?
That we are scaling, yeah.
One big project, one technology that you love that is being accelerated.
It's a little bit early days because most of the startups in our program, they're having trouble getting to their factory. We're still in lockdown. That's quite significant. So I think it's a movement on the ground in the last 3 months. But
okay.
Yeah. Cool.
And what about these startups that went to Ho Chi Minh and you said 150 investors? How many invested? How did it go?
We're still seeing, because normally whenever investors come to pitch days, it's still a 3 to 6 month process. So the deals still have to close due diligence. But it was more this idea, even Ho Chi Minh, before we thought of virtual is always there. The idea of building these platforms online. Yeah. But I think this is giving us an opportunity to force people to try it, and maybe it'll stick.
Yeah, I was hopping in earlier in the Australasia conference, and Kate Cornick from Launchvik in Melbourne was saying, we see angel investors now investing without ever meeting the startup entrepreneur. Nobody thought they would ever do that. Right? Meeting is always one of the steps.
It's an unbelievable idea.
Charlotte, tell us about 1 or 2 cities that have taken action and funneling some of that recovery money towards accelerating green tech.
I mean, there's a whole raft of our municipalities that are really gearing up, and I think what's kind of echoing Frans and Pratap, it's interesting to see municipal challenges being put out to the private sector. We had what we call a City Solutions Platform Challenge program by the municipality of Milan recently, and rather than it being in situ with lots of their local businesses, it does open it up virtually. So we had businesses from Latin America, from Asia, from all around the world joining in on this innovation day to effectively reduce the asymmetry of the information between the municipality and the startup and tech and larger organizations, community of entrepreneurs, where it's moving so quickly, the developments of what's possible. And I think incremental improvements is very important too. How much more efficient can solar panels be? Can they be recycled? And putting those challenges out to the private sector to harness that knowledge, which the municipality then steps back and takes away, and therefore may approach a problem in an entirely different way as a result. So we're seeing from Medellin to Vancouver and New York, Addis Ababa is next in line to launch a challenge. We have a Women for Tech Challenge program that's still going strong. So keep an eye out. There's loads of organizations. We need that ecosystem of thousands of players that are providing these opportunities for the best minds around the world to focus on real problems that municipalities are dealing with, whether it's single-use plastic or, C40 Cities have invested in 66,000 electric buses over the last decade, and there's a whole raft more to come, particularly in Latin America. The next challenge will be what do you do with the battery at the end of the life as an electric bus? So with wind blades, how do you use them after their time on the wind farm? All these challenges are going to be in the pipeline and coming through. So absolutely say to everybody out there, keep reskilling. There's so many free online courses coming up, and keep exploring all the solutions that will really help municipalities and your citizens in your city in the direction we need to be traveling in.
Yeah, I mean, now that the physical barriers are broken, I want to see more of these groups coming together. And there's the discovery of startups, of solutions, the crowdsourcing of those, and the crowdsourcing of challenges. But one of the biggest challenges to the adoption and the success of green tech has been like the first set of clients, the first scale project at scale, so that they can start producing at higher volume to reduce their cost per unit, which is, you know, always 100 times, 1,000 times more expensive than the old technologies that they depreciated. And Frans and I were talking about these challenges in Denmark, you know, just in February, just because before the crisis, and saying we need to solve that together. We need to solve that, you know, with cities working together, national governments working together. Do you see that happening in terms of, you know, cities aligning together to create global procurement programs, where we say we find the best startups and we're going to be their first customers, and we're going to be their first, second, third customers, and we're going to start helping them increase their volume of production and build bigger plants, so they're you know, maybe still more expensive, but reduce that gap so that the private sector can become a client afterwards. Do you see that happening, Charlotte, on your side with governments you work with?
I mean, it's always putting ourselves in the shoes of the municipalities that are looking after taxpayers' revenue, trying to spend it wisely, and making sure that you know, the service is delivered to the highest quality. So what we do find is that municipalities are increasingly having pilot testing zones in the city, or pilot testing opportunities to give startups their first sale and feedback. And then actually they are kind of joining together with each other and kind of having trade shows to say, when they have visitors to the city, take a look at our new water network and the technology that's surrounding it, reducing the leakages or the likes. And then asking effectively the entrepreneur to take it to another municipality and try it out there, or pair up with a larger organization who has that trajectory of historical, you know, work to put in the procurement documents. So we see more and more municipalities trying to kind of cluster their businesses together, give them discounted rent, in order for them to get off the ground, knowing, as the Startup Genome latest report said, over 80 ecosystems around the world have now produced unicorn businesses. It's not just Silicon Valley. And they know
that's really good to see.
The startup of today could be
Frans,
the biggest employer.
Yeah. Thank you, Charlotte. Frans, I wanted to finish with you.
Yeah,
like,
so,
you know, what is the big network solutions that you think are needed to solve those challenges and see green tech finally thrive?
Well, I think what Charlotte described is very powerful. So the key to these ecosystems is, in the end, deployment. So you want to bring it from the lab into the real world. And then once it's in the real world, once it starts to scale, you see prices coming down dramatically. That's basically the key success story of solar. But Germany basically paid for making solar from really expensive, really cheap. And then China, with subsidies, took care of the last part. And now it's the cheapest resource of energy in like 60–70% of the world, which is amazing. And Denmark did the same for wind. So if you can sort of do what the C40 is doing, sort of bundling demand, or basically experimenting with a certain approach in the city and show that it works, and then bring it to the next city, that creates demand for entrepreneurs. So the entrepreneurs can come in, and once the entrepreneurs can see revenue, the investors can come in, right? It all starts with the demand. I'm doing a similar project in the Netherlands, but then on the corporate side. So the Netherlands has basically the whole value chain of the chemical industry, from Shell as bringing in oil to plastic paints, whatever you have. And so what we do is we create challenges where the industry shows their complicated puzzles in the value chains between the companies and how to green the stuff, and how to basically take the oil out, bring CO2 in as a resource, all that. And that shows demand on the corporate side, and that demand then makes it possible for entrepreneurs to go in, which makes it possible for investors to put funding behind it. So what I hope that comes out of these lessons from the past 40 years and the policies that we can now put in place with all this crisis funding is to focus on deployment. So I call it deployment-led innovation. And a big part of that puzzle is going to be the startup ecosystem that you create, and whether it has enough dynamics. Are the funders there? Is the talent there? Is the demand there? And if you bring that all in a mix, I don't doubt that 20 years from now, we can all fly to the next Startup Genome conference somewhere on the planet for a price that is not that different from what we currently pay, and it's going to be carbon neutral. I'm not doubtful about it. As long as we put deployment central, deployment-led innovation really is the key.
Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone. I think we've run out of time. It was really great to have you talk about this, the most important type of entrepreneurship today, the green entrepreneurship. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Bye-bye.
Thank you, JF. Thanks, Pratap. Thanks, Charlotte.
Thank you, everyone. Charlotte, Frans.
Thank you, Pratap, Charlotte, Frans.